Hi, Mike.
So you just heard me finish up about economic dependence on government, but the government wants us to become dependent on them medically as well now, right?
Yes, yes, and they're I wish they were as free with information as they are with taxpayer money, so that we would actually get some real information. But they aren't.
Information is free as far as I know, isn't it? Although they try to charge us for it, don't they?
No, it's and it's our information,
That's right.
information we're paying for. It's data we're paying for to be collected, whether it's laboratory data or hospitalization data, mortality data. And the press conference today, I think Larry has a clip geared up.
Yeah, let's hold off just a minute on that because I want to set the big stage first with you. All right, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the big question today that we're going to ponder, everything we talk about today, I want to think about in relation to this question. Is there any, I can't even say the word, epidemiological reason? Is that right? Did I say it right? That's a tongue twister, and I had to really think to spit that one out. Is there any epidemiological? See, I couldn't do it. Logical reason. Let me hear you say it.
Epidemiological.
You say you're too practiced at this.
Right.
I can say epidemiologist, but I can't say epidemiological. Anyway, is there any reason medically that we should still be in a state of emergency under emergency powers control of the executive branch?
No, I mean, if you go back to what the original rationale was, is it basically boiled down to the healthcare system being overwhelmed. And, no one in their right mind could argue that the healthcare system is overwhelmed, least of all by COVID at this point. We have the metrics out in front of us. The hospitalizations are down around 100. We had 2 days in a row, Mike, where there was zero COVID deaths. Zero.
Yeah, now we're going to show those numbers in a minute, but you're right. Let's go back to last year. Remember what we were told, right? That 2 weeks to slow the spread, right? That we need to make sure that cases don't go up so fast that we overwhelm our hospital and medical capacity to deal with sick people, right?
Right.
Now, we never reached those falsely projected highs, but the goal was maybe reasonable at the time. We didn't know as much as we know. Let's slow the spread. Let's make sure we're not overwhelming the capacity. But now they've moved the goalposts, right?
Let's be specific, Mike, because the numbers are shocking. We in the first wave, and again, you have to give people leeway. It was a relatively unknown virus, even though we know something about coronaviruses. And there was SARS-CoV-1, this is SARS-CoV-2, but still, benefit of the doubt. The projections that were made by Brown University, the Department of Epidemiology, the Department of Health, all the major players that we're seeing, either behind the scenes or now up front, in the case of Dr. Alexander Scott, they were all involved in these models which really shaped the policy. And what did those models say? The more hysterical model said that we would peak around the end of April, beginning of May, at 4,300 beds occupied by COVID patients. That, of course, mandated the construction of overflow facilities, very costly overflow facilities. The more subdued estimate was 2,250. And yet, in that first wave, we peaked at 375 hospalizations. That was
so they were off by over a magnitude of 15 almost.
They were off 6 to 11-fold, if you want to be exact. And 11-fold being the upper estimate. No one, again, I think this is very important to review. No journalist, other than Ed Acorn, even wrote a story about this. And in fact, it turned out to be the last story he ever wrote for the Providence Journal. None of his so-called journalistic colleagues picked up upon this. None of them questioned the principles about why they were this degree off. And fast forward to where we are now, Mike, one has to presume when you hear what's going on at these press conferences and the interplay between Governor McKee and Dr. Scott and the behind the scenes invocations of Dr. Jha, that he's waiting for these same people to give their imprimatur on when the state can fully reopen, drop the mask mandate, et cetera.
Well, and McKee clearly said today, when sort of asked that question, well, when we get maybe 70% of the population vaccinated.
He gave a number, Mike. He said he wanted 620,000.
All right. So that's roughly the 67%. Right. My point being, a year ago, the goal to slow the spread, to make sure we didn't overwhelm our medical facilities. Okay, you could maybe argue that was reasonable at the time, even though the projections were unreasonable. But now the goal has shifted. They've moved the goalposts. It's not about they're trying to stop the spread of a pandemic, even though the medical facilities are nowhere near capacity.
Exactly.
Right now.
It really sounds like it's been floated out there. I mean, some countries are more open about it, like places like New Zealand. They have a, quote, zero COVID policy. It has nothing to do with the health, but which is a pipe dream and an absurdity, Mike. I mean, chances are that this coronavirus, like the four that before it that circulate, is going to become an endemic, meaning a seasonal strain. It already looks to have many of those characteristics. And the idea that you're going to eradicate it is just absurd.
Right. Right. All right. So on that point, before we get to the clip, and I know you're not probably prepared with data on this, but we're now down to 1 or 2 deaths a day, where the hospitalizations are dropping by 3, 4, 5 people every day. We're approaching 100 there. I mean, we have probably just had normal cold or flu seasons where we're at these rates of death and hospitalizations that this has occurred, and we're not under states of emergency then.
Absolutely. And Mike, the
right. So you can confirm that, right? That there have been non-pandemic flu seasons that are worse than this.
Yeah, we're actually I think we've hit we're below average mortality, total mortality at this time of year now. So we're in very good shape, Mike. And the other thing that's happening is that one of these 4 circulating common cold causing primarily coronaviruses, actually 2 of them right now, have their own seasonal peak. Now, at least 2 of them have been investigated in terms of how they might cross-react with the standard PCR testing. Okay, this was a methods paper published last spring. At least 2 of the 4 that circulate, and they're sort of at their peak right now, one of their seasonal peaks, cross-react with the PCR assay and can be contributing false positives. So one possible explanation, in addition to high CT values, which we've discussed so many times before, is that we've had 6 weeks now. Dr. Scott admitted that today. 6 straight weeks of about 2% positive.
That's a good number, right?
It's a very good number. But now when we see this spike of these seasonal coronaviruses, 2 in particular, who knows if they're contributing false positives that go beyond the idea of high cycle threshold positives.
Well, what we do know is that even though the rate, the number of cases and the positivity rate, which we'll look at in a few minutes, has stayed steady, yet deaths and hospitalizations still are declining, right? So again, either they're false positives or it's young, healthy people who aren't catching it, or right. But it's not.
And that makes sense too.
The spread is not a problem right now, right?
Exactly. And what's important is that so we have this background of so many people having been infected that we have naturally acquired immunity, and that's keeping the spread of the virus low. It doesn't go away, but it's keeping it low, and also. Another very positive trend is that the state has done a good job in vaccinating the vulnerable. We can argue about interrupting some of that process with the teachers, et cetera. But the last I looked, we're over 80% for 65 plus. We're over 80% of those people have been vaccinated. That's probably that, and the natural immunity that population has acquired is probably why there's hospitalization rates are plummeting and death rates are going as low as they can go.
All right, let's play the clip. I don't know what clip this is. I know Larry Liberty Guy has it.
Oh, can I introduce it? Can I
Yeah,
introduce
go
it?
ahead. Yep. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's a fantastic exchange between Pat Ford, the libertarian, and the non-journalist who's the only one who acts like a journalist at these press conferences, and Alexander Scott, and her responses and her facial expressions are just classic.
Go ahead, Larry.
Doctor, we talk about micromanagement. This is a lot of folks have evidenced a lot of frustration. For example, the change from 8 people to 10 people at the table. Now, in a state where, for example, we don't seem to have an agreed upon CTR cycle time threshold value in terms of arranging or arriving at our 2% infection rate, at a time when every established clinical trial has denied and disproven the efficacy of using masks. I think there's what, a dozen
Look at that.
out there, randomized trials, thousands of people involved. How do we arrive at these seemingly, how many angels on the needle or pin measurements do we get going from 8 to 10 specifically that has significant impact going forward on business?
We understand the science behind the virus and how the virus spreads. When you have larger groups of people together in close quarters,
They just use that word, science.
engaging closely,
She's not answering his question, but go ahead.
ventilated areas,
Yeah.
with a variant that is continuing
Open the variant.
A variant.
or transmission is higher. Every step we can take to mitigate against that, to minimize the risk of that type of invisible or otherwise spread, is valuable to.
Invisible or otherwise.
See, again, they're consumed with spread, not the severity of the disease. This is where they've been wrong from day one, right?
Wait, let her go.
We're not still continuing to decline. That means the variant is still present, it is
Variant.
spreading, and we need to continue to be cautious in how we're proceeding.
Actually, at a point in time when Rhode Islanders were surveyed, there was an acknowledged near 96% use of masks. And I'm just using this as one example. I don't want to assess over masks per se. We had one of our biggest spikes. Just continuing restrictions, we seem to have the worst of all worlds here.
Masks are effective. We can go to the next question, Brian.
Yeah, let's ignore it. Yeah, let's ignore it.
That's it. That's it. Masks are effective. So what, Mike? Let me review what he was trying to get into, and you know, it's a layperson, and you know, he did a great job.
Sounds like he's been listening to this show a lot.
Yeah, and you know, we've had some discussions, shall we say? But what he was trying to say is that, look, and I would have presented it this way. I would have said, you know, Dr. Scott and Governor McKee, over the past 12 years, we've had 12 consecutive randomized controlled trials that have evaluated masking in non-medical settings in the community, and have each one of them has found that the masking group did not slow down the rate of respiratory viral infections. An enormous study, the final one of those 12, was actually with COVID-19 itself. On top of that, we have just purely observational data from Rhode Island, which Pat did point out. There was a point on November 2nd, it was reported that 96% of Rhode Islanders wore a mask.
Yeah, among the highest rate in the country, right?
The highest rate.
The highest.
The highest rate in the country. That was right before that Twin Peaks spike that went from the middle of November to the middle of January.
Yeah.
We now have 81% plus of the high-risk population vaccinated. We have therapeutics available for early disease, the monoclonal antibodies. And we have 17 states which have lifted their mask mandates, each one of which, Mike, has a lower per capita COVID-19 death rate than us. We're ready.
But she doesn't want to discuss that, does she?
None of that is discussed. Masks work. Next question.
Right.
This is not appropriate.
Is that science-based? What she's saying?
No, it's Lysenkoist totalitarian type.
It's what?
Lysenko, the Stalin's favorite agronomist who helped starve Russians to death.
Oh, the 5-year plans and all that stuff.
Well, and with pseudoscience,
Yeah,
actually, he was supposedly an agronomist who rejected biological genetics. But this is nonsense. The mask is really a talisman, and that's why it's so important, Mike, for these people. The mask is
Raccoons.
a talisman.
Raccoons.
Yeah, well, it's a
No, take a look. Take a look. Hold on. I'm showing a funny here.
okay.
So they want us to be raccoons.
Yeah.
Wear the mask all the time. Wash your hands all the time because of Corona.
Yeah, and Mexico is introducing nasal masks.
Oh,
You saw that one?
I forgot to get a picture of that.
So
Yeah.
that you can eat while you have your little bandolero mask on or whatever it is. It's a it. But the point is that public health officials can make recommendations about marginal, I would say, ineffective interventions like masking. They have no right when there's a body of evidence that they don't work to force them upon people. This is just inappropriate. It's the same thing with all of a sudden we're down to 3 feet. Well, what was the rationale for 6 feet?
The distancing in schools, right? Yeah.
Yes, and so when you tear away the veneer, you see that there's nothing there. There aren't, and in the case of masking, it's worse. We have data that it simply doesn't work. If people feel better about it, fine. No one's stopping them.
So with the if we can end the state of emergency, we can maybe get to a point where mask wearing becomes optional up to each person.
It should be, it should be optional now. But I mean, the hope would be that certainly by after Easter, it should be brought up. The thing that was alarming, though, was that Governor McKee was talking about at 620,000 vaccinated, at least with the first dose of the 2-dose regimens, he would reassess. I mean, what better benchmarks does he want than what we have right now? And Dr. Scott said that at least in the most recent sample, given everything that we know, the positive trends, she said that 40% of some genotyping sample that they did was the UK variant. Well, wait a minute. If it's already at 40%, then it is in other states and even higher. Then we're doing really well with
what are we afraid of? Right. Then what are we afraid
really
of?
Well. Mike, the Houston hospital system just uploaded a preprint yesterday, and it came online today, this morning, and I read it, really avidly because it was so interesting. They actually did a mortality study showing that the period they clocked from January 1st to March 7th, the UK variant became predominant in the Houston area. And they had a group of people infected with non-variant versus the variant. There was absolutely no difference in the chief index that we would look at, which was COVID-19 mortality. And in fact, even though the variant folks had higher viral loads, so lower cycle thresholds, they still didn't have any mortality penalty.
All right, so that's the key thing, and that's the point I was just making. Again, so here you see this headline in the Providence Journal, I don't know, today or yesterday, concerned as U.S. cases rise. If mortality was rising, we would be concerned, right? If hospitalizations were rising, we might be concerned.
Mike, there's a concern about this number. I don't want to skip over this. This is significant because we saw this disgusting game played with mortality. Now we're seeing it played with cases. I have a colleague who's a data analyst from New Jersey, which is contributing a lot to this picture right now. And what she found is that New Jersey, which used to dump in old deaths, is now dumping in old cases. She found over 1,000 cases that began in February. We're almost at the end of March now that were just recently dumped into the system. Georgia found the same thing. So they're playing these games again, Mike. At a certain point, a year.
But it's the wrong metric. cases, right? That's the wrong metric,
But
right?
but you can't say what's going on now is influenced by cases that they dug up and dumped
Of
into the
course.
system from February or earlier. This is well, but they played this game with deaths. Now they were called out about it, and now they're playing this game with cases.
Yeah, since they can't because increased deaths, you can't fudge that. I mean, you can a little bit, yes, if you fake deaths, but people die or they don't, right?
No, it's the dating. You know, you can't make a curve. You can't say, well, how am I doing this week versus the week before if this week you're taking deaths from 3 weeks ago. I mean, it's just you're taking cases from 3 weeks ago. It just doesn't work. It breaks the whole system down.
All right,
And
let's
so
look at the
these are
numbers.
very dubious things.
All right, let's look at the numbers in Rhode Island. So here is the test positivity you referred to earlier.
Right, and you see how flat it's been. It's hovered around 2% for 6 straight weeks.
Are you concerned that that's not going down further?
No, that's the whole point, Mike. And so, you know, in the background, you can see a big spike in human coronaviruses, non-SARS human coronaviruses, and maybe that's contributing to some of this background because we know there's cross-reactivity. But regardless, you know, we have no information. You know, this looks exactly like that period that Todd Kenyon and Chuck Eaton and I analyzed when we finally got those data with your help, with Roland's help. And the cycle thresholds turned out to be very high. So we don't know what this means, and it may not get much lower. It may not get much.
All right. So you're not looking for this to go to zero.
No.
Okay.
I think it's absurd.
Okay. All right. Here's hospitalizations.
I mean, you couldn't ask for a nicer trend now.
Just over 100 now in
going
Rhode Island.
down and down and down.
Intensive care, I think we're just in the mid-teens now. Right.
And also, Mike, remember, this is still reflecting an overestimate, really, because the Rhode Island Department of Health admits that these are people in the hospital that test positive. They may not be coming in with pneumonias anymore. You know, if they're coming in for an elective procedure and they happen to test positive, the Rhode Island Department of Health rationalizes labeling them COVID because it's more intensive to isolate them, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, this is it. But regardless, it's a very positive trend.
All right, so take a look at this hospital data. Take a look at this mortality data.
We've had 2 with none, 0 deaths.
And again, the question is this: does this look like a state of emergency that requires dictatorial emergency powers control over our state?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And again, so what are they holding over? There's always a sword of Damocles that they're holding over our head. It's the variants. Well, we're not operating in a vacuum with variants either. There's lots of data on variants, and they don't seem to be, they may be slightly more infectious, but they're not increasing morbidity and mortality.
All right, let's spend our final few minutes just talking generally about vaccines again. So here's my question. You know, I don't put much credibility in them, but there are some people out there just saying, do not take these vaccines if you don't have to. So here's my question. I'm not asking you to advise people to take it or not. But when you see somebody make a statement like that, is there concern, as far as you can tell, because you might have some kind of near-term reaction? We've all seen reports of people just dropping dead or getting sick, or is it really more of a long-term unknown thing that we either have reason or no reason to fear? Where is of these naysayers, is their concern more short-term immediate or long-term we just don't know?
I can't speak for them, Mike. What I can tell you is that it does look like in terms of allergic, so-called anaphylactic reactions, even some odd blood abnormalities that develop, all very rare. Let's preface that. They're all very rare. They still seem to be less rare at this point. It's hard to say, but they still seem to be less rare than what you would get from seasonal flu vaccination programs. they just seem to be a little higher. Now, is some of it because the campaign is just so much more aggressive? We're just vaccinating so many more people. It's really hard to sort out, but the signal seems to be a little bit louder. The other issue is that, you know, these are brand new vaccine platforms. They're still being operating under emergency use.
Would you call them experimental?
Yes, they are.
All right.
They're explicitly experimental.
All right.
They're operating under emergency use authorizations. None of them have gone through the full licensure process, which takes at least 2 years. So at best, we're about 6 months or so into that. It would take about another, you know, year and a half of data collection and analysis for safety and efficacy to license them. You know, the first were the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, so they're slightly ahead on that trajectory. But it looks like even those two have about 18 months or so to go before the FDA would grant them formal licensure.
All right.
So there are just concerns about newness. I mean, we just don't know, and let's just pray that there are no particularly common and negative long-term side effects. But we simply don't know. The other thing is, Mike, they're starting to talk about. I saw Rutgers University suggesting that kids wouldn't be able to come back on campus in the fall without being vaccinated. That's a lawsuit because again, there's no way that it's going to be approved by FDA as soon as the fall based on the current timetable. And you'd be mandating something which is against federal law. You cannot mandate someone to take an experimental drug or vaccine. And that's a real issue. And on top of that, Mike, the first trials are literally underway now for the lowest age group, for people under 16. That's first happening.
So, you know,
we don't even have EUA for that yet.
We're going to be talking more about that and looking at results because, you know, the mandate, I mean, the vaccine Nazis are out there. They're trying to implement mandates. And, you know, so I've taken the position, you know, I gave a speech to a Warwick Rotary Club last year. And one of the questions is, you know, what do you think about the pandemics, economic response, shutdowns, and the vaccines? And have you taken a vaccine? So I answered all the other questions. But I said, listen, because I don't want to in any way promote that either socially or by government mandate that people should be shamed or punished or restricted in their freedoms, whether they take a vaccine or not. So in that spirit, and because it's my job as head of a free, you know, constitutional rights, free market think tank, I'm respectfully not going to answer that question and say that's my medical data and it shouldn't matter to any of you.
Right. No,
that was a response they took. You know, so
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I would only add, you know, it should be based as other therapies, other interventions are based, particularly when there's unknowns, on risk benefit, you know, calculations. So if you're a high risk person, or you're the guardian for someone that's in a nursing home, is institutionalized and is high risk, that would tend to argue in favor of vaccination. But young, healthy people at this point, I don't see any reason for them to be vaccinated unless they are, you know, healthy and young, but constantly exposed to people that have heavy viral loads potentially. That's also different.
So I want to take this this vaccine Nazi thing to one level lower. And this is not so much a medical question for you, but just you and I talking politics and policy now. So you know how before cigarettes were totally banned, you know, from most public and private places, they used to have smoking sections, right?
Right.
Non-smoking sections, right? Even on airplanes, they used to have a smoking section in the back or wherever it was, and non-smoking the rest. Restaurants have it. I know, and Roland just made a great point here. The Miami Heat basketball team now, so this is a private company, and they're saying we're going to create a vaccination section. They're not saying, I don't think they're saying if you don't have a vaccination, you can't come to a game. I don't know that for sure, but what I'm assuming is they're saying, hey, if you're going to feel safer among other vaccinated people, we'll create a vaccine section for you, just like we used to have a smoking section. Now, that might be silly, but as long as you're giving people that choice and option, I guess, and it's not a mandate, I get, or restriction, I guess we could live with that, huh?
Yeah, there's something creepy about it though, Mike. I mean, it really is another form of discrimination. And
Well, you could have said the same thing with smokers, right?
right, yeah.
I mean, we did it. All right. Last question.
Well, but then there should also be a section for people that had the virus. I mean, those people probably have at least as good or better immunity than people that
Good.
were vaccinated.
Yeah,
You
you
know,
could.
I mean,
Yeah. Just like some restaurants will say you have to wear a mask. Well, once the mandates go, that's up to them. If they want to restrict the number of people who come,
and it's also up to the people whether they
then
want.
I'll go eat somewhere else. Thank you very much. You know, right?
Or you can watch the Heat games on
Yeah.
flat screen TV. You know.
All right, last question, technical one, medical one again. So the fourth vaccine is, I guess, has the AstraZeneca been approved for emergency use in America?
This is an interesting one. Yeah.
All right, so the first two were the mRNA, the Johnson, Moderna and Pfizer. The Johnson and Johnson was something that actually went into the cells of your, the nucleus of your DNA. What kind of technically structure does this AstraZeneca one have?
Oh, the AstraZeneca is another adenovirus. It's a chimpanzee adenovirus vector.
Like the
Johnson
and Johnson one.
Johnson and Johnson. Yeah, except it's a different adenovirus. It's a chimpanzee adenovirus that's being used to insert, the I believe it's still also the spike protein gene. So it's another vaccine that interacts directly with the DNA.
And you're still more comfortable with the first two, the mRNA version.
Absolutely. Just on the basis of unknowns. Yeah. I mean, I'd rather be dealing with something that, goes outside the cell nucleus to the protein producing machinery, does its thing there and is degraded, relatively quickly, versus something that goes into the nucleus of cells, interacts with the genome to insert a gene to produce, ultimately to produce the same protein.
Now, when you say degraded relatively quickly, we talking days, weeks,
hours
months?
to days is
hours to days. Wow. Okay.
Is what is said. We don't know what happens in terms of how, it's just an unknown. I mean, it's integrated into the genome and there it is. So to me that's quite different. And like I said, the only experience we have with adenoviral vector platform vaccines is with rabies, and rabies in animals. So it delivers a gene that triggers an immune response in all kinds of furry creatures in the forests of Canada, and they are protected from rabies, and therefore they can't transmit rabies to livestock, to humans, et cetera. And we don't hear of any man-eating otters coming out of the waters of Canada, so I don't know what to say, but that's the only experience that we have.
All right, we're going to circle back to our original question and give you the final word again, if you want to sum it up or mention something quickly we haven't covered yet. What reason can you think of that Rhode Island still should be under emergency powers, control by the executive branch, and in a medical state of emergency? Is there any the science reason for that right now?
None. And even if we're obviously has nothing to do with overwhelming the healthcare system. Or even the chance that the healthcare system could be overwhelmed again. I mean, I guess that's the kind of rationale, because it's boiling down now. They basically seem to be targeting a zero COVID strategy.
Right. Yeah, zero COVID, which is ridiculous. Can't stop a pandemic.
That's an absurdity, and
shifting goalposts. Yep.
It's a pipe dream, and it's very destructive. I think it's very destructive socially, Mike. And again, I don't want to perseverate too much on this, but that really is why I'm so disturbed with the masking thing. People need to socialize and see each other's faces again, wherever they are. It's just absurd.
Even faces like yours, Andy. Faces like yours.
And yours.
Dr. Andrew Bostom, thanks again for all your expertise on In the Dugout. See you next week.
We'll have some FaceTime later, okay?
Yeah.